This is Jimmy Kingston. At just 35 years old, he had built an empire worth billions, a tech genius feared and respected across Silicon Valley. He had the mansion, the power, the world at his fingertips. But today, none of that matters, because Jimmy Kingston can't see anymore. Betrayed by the one man he trusted, blinded in an accident that should never have happened, abandoned by the woman who promised forever. And now, sitting alone beneath an old oak tree on his own estate, this once powerful billionaire has become invisible. But someone sees him. Her name is Irene Lopez. She has no home, no family, no hope, just torn clothes, bruised skin, and a heart that refuses to walk past a crying man, even if that man is a billionaire. What happens next will break your heart and put it back together again. A blind man who lost everything. A homeless girl with nothing to lose, and a love story no one saw coming. But before we dive deeper into this story, please kindly take a moment to comment below with the city you are watching this video from. Hit the like button, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel to help me to reach my first 1,000 subscribers if you haven't done that already. Useless, that's what you are now, Jimmy. The words still echoed in Jimmy Kingston's head 3 days later. Not because Marcus Hale, his former CFO and oldest friend, had said them with venom, but because he'd said them with pity. Pity was worse than hate. Jimmy sat on the cold marble steps outside his Pacific Heights mansion, his fingers wrapped tightly around a white cane he barely knew how to use. His designer gray suit, once pressed to perfection, was wrinkled and stained with dirt from where he'd stumbled earlier that morning. Dark aviator sunglasses hid the eyes that no longer worked, the eyes that once commanded boardrooms and closed billion-dollar deals with a single glance. Now, they saw nothing. Not the sunset over the Golden Gate Bridge, not the manicured lawn stretching before him, not even his own reflection. 3 weeks ago, Jimmy Kingston had it all. He was the founder and CEO of Kingston Technologies, a cybersecurity empire that protected half the Fortune 500. His face graced magazine covers. Tech blogs called him the guardian of Silicon Valley. Investors fought for 5 minutes of his time, and Vanessa, beautiful, elegant Vanessa Monroe, wore his engagement ring and smiled for every camera. But power makes people hungry, and Marcus Hale had been starving. It happened in the lab. Jimmy had been reviewing a new encryption prototype late one evening when the explosion occurred. Not a massive blast, just enough. A carefully placed electrical surge triggered a chemical reaction in the lab's industrial batteries. The flash was blinding, literally. When Jimmy woke up in the hospital 2 days later, the doctors told him the damage to his optic nerves was irreversible. No surgery could fix it. No technology could restore what had been burned away. "I'm sorry, Mr. Kingston. You'll never see again." The investigation revealed the truth within days. Someone had tampered with the lab's safety protocols. Someone who knew exactly when Jimmy would be there. Someone with access to the building's security systems. Marcus Hale, the man Jimmy had trusted since business school, the man he'd made CFO. The man who'd been quietly siphoning company funds and selling proprietary tech to competitors for years, and who panicked when Jimmy started asking questions. Marcus didn't mean to blind him. He only meant to scare him, to create chaos, to buy time. But the plan went wrong, and now Marcus was gone, vanished to some offshore haven with millions, while Jimmy was left in darkness. Vanessa visited him once in the hospital. She stood at the foot of his bed, designer heels clicking nervously on the tile floor, and spoke in the soft, measured tone people use when delivering bad news to children. "Jimmy, I can't do this. Can't do what? His voice was hoarse. I can't be with someone like you, not now, not like this. She twisted the engagement ring off her finger and set it on the bedside table with a soft clink. You were supposed to be strong. You were supposed to be Jimmy Kingston. But now you're just broken. She left before he could respond. The board of directors followed suit. Within a week, they'd voted him out as CEO, citing medical incapacity and shareholder concerns. His assistant stopped returning calls. His so-called friends stopped visiting. Even his housekeeper, Maria, who'd worked for him for 8 years, gave her 2 weeks' notice. I'm sorry, Mr. Kingston, but I have grandchildren to think about. I need stable work. That morning, the morning everything truly shattered, Jimmy woke up alone in his 12-bedroom mansion and realized he couldn't remember where the bathroom was. He stumbled through the hallway, hands groping along walls he used to walk past without thinking. He tripped over a rug, knocked over a vase, cursed as it shattered. When he finally made it outside, the fresh air didn't help. The panic in his chest only grew. I used to run this city. Now I can't even find my own front door. He walked aimlessly, desperately, across the lawn until his cane hit something solid, a tree, the old oak tree near the edge of the property, and that's where he stopped. Jimmy Kingston, billionaire, genius, king of Silicon Valley, collapsed at the base of that tree and wept. He cried for the sight he'd lost, for the empire stolen from him, for the woman who couldn't love a broken man, for the friend who'd destroyed him, for the future that had vanished in a flash of light. He cried until his chest ached and his throat burned, and he didn't care who saw. Because no one was watching anyway. No one cared. He was alone until a voice, soft, hesitant. Are you okay? Jimmy froze. Footsteps, light. Careful. I don't mean to bother you. I can leave if you want. But are you hurt? He didn't answer. He didn't even lift his head. But then he felt it. A hand, small, trembling, dirt-smudged. It touched his shoulder gently, like someone afraid of breaking something already shattered. It's okay, the voice whispered. You don't have to say anything. I just didn't want you to be alone. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Jimmy Kingston felt something other than despair. He felt seen. Irene Lopez had learned early that the world did not slow down for girls like her. The Tenderloin was her classroom. Sirens for school bells, fists for discipline. After her mother died on a stained hospital mattress from an infection that could have been treated if they'd had money, Irene was left with a man who only knew how to drink, shout, and hurt. Her stepfather's anger came in waves, a slammed bottle, a shove against the wall, fingers digging into her arm when she was too slow. The night he grabbed her by the throat and hissed that she should have died with her mother, Irene waited until he passed out, stole the few dollars in his pocket, and ran. The streets did not welcome her. They tolerated her. She slept in doorways that smelled of urine and stale beer, wrapping her thin hoodie around herself like armor. She learned which dumpsters offered still edible leftovers after restaurants closed, which alleys to avoid when certain men loitered too long, and how to walk fast enough to seem busy but not important enough to be noticed. Hunger became a dull ache she carried like a second spine. Sometimes, when the wind cut through her clothes, she pressed her back to a brick wall and whispered to her mother, asking if heaven felt anything like warmth. That night the fog rolled in thicker than usual, swallowing the city lights as Irene wandered farther than she ever had. Her feet throbbed, and every shadow looked like her stepfather's silhouette. She followed a winding hill, chasing the promise of quiet, until the noise of traffic faded and rich silence took its place. High iron gates, trimmed hedges, a driveway that seemed to stretch forever. She had stumbled into another world, Jimmy Kingston's world. She only wanted a corner of his estate wall to curl against, a place where no one would think to look for a girl like her. But then she heard it, a broken sound, raw and strangled. A man's sob. She pressed closer, peering around the massive oak tree, and saw him, a man in a ruined suit, dark glasses on his face, gripping a white cane like it was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. Dirt smeared his shirt. His shoulders shook. For a moment, Irene hesitated. Rich people didn't need help from gutter girls. They called security. They called the police. They called her trash. But something about the way his fingers trembled, the way his mouth twisted as if each breath hurt, sliced through the fear. He looked like she felt, lost, abandoned, invisible in a world that had moved on without him. Irene's bare feet carried her forward before her mind caught up. She knelt beside him, heart pounding, the chill of the grass seeping into her knees. Up close she could smell cologne mixed with sweat and despair. Carefully, as if touching a wounded animal, she lifted her hand and wiped the tear tracking down his cheek with the edge of her sleeve. "Hey," she whispered, voice shaking. You don't have to be alone right now." He flinched at her touch, then stilled as if listening to the sound of her breathing. Irene waited, ready to run if he shouted. Instead, his voice came out cracked, small, nothing like the powerful men she'd heard on TV. "Are you still there?" She swallowed hard. "Yeah, I'm here." In that moment, the billionaire and the homeless girl were just two shattered souls under the same tree, clinging to the only thing they had left, the fragile comfort of not being alone. Jimmy's voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "What's your name?" "Irene," she answered softly, still kneeling beside him. "Irene Lopez," he nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory. A long silence stretched between them before Irene cleared her throat. "Your house. It's not far. I can help you get back if you want." "I don't need help." The words came out sharp, defensive. Jimmy pushed himself up, using the tree trunk, his cane scraping against roots. "I can manage." Irene stepped back, watching as he took 3 unsteady steps across the lawn. His cane caught on uneven ground, his ankle twisted, and suddenly he was falling. Her hand shot out, catching him under his arms before he hit the grass. For a moment they stayed frozen, his weight against her small frame, both breathing hard. "Let me help," Irene whispered. "Please." Jimmy's jaw clenched, pride warring with reality. Finally he nodded. She guided his hand to her shoulder and walked slowly, describing each step. "3 stairs coming up. There's a railing on your right." Her voice was steady, patient, nothing like the pity-soaked tones of the hospital staff or the impatient sighs of his former assistant. When they reached the massive front door, Jimmy stopped. "Why are you doing this?" Irene hesitated, her fingers still wrapped around his arm. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," she said quietly, "and I know what that feels like." Something shifted in Jimmy's chest, a crack in the armor he'd built around his grief. "There's a guest house," he said gruffly, "behind the pool. You can stay tonight. It's not safe for you out there." "I don't need—" "Please." His voice softened. "Stay." Irene's throat tightened. No one had ever said please to her before. "Okay." Morning light filtered through windows Irene had only dreamed existed. She'd barely slept in the guest house bed. Too soft, too clean, too unreal. But when dawn broke, she crept into the main house and found the kitchen. By the time Jimmy emerged, disoriented and fumbling along the hallway wall, the smell of coffee filled the air. "Mr. Kingston, Irene called gently. "The table's 4 steps straight ahead. Coffee's at 2 o'clock." He stopped, head tilting toward her voice. She guided his hand to the chair, set the warm mug between his palms, and sat across from him in silence. Jimmy took a sip, then another. When he spoke, his voice was raw with something that wasn't quite hope, but was close. "You don't pity me, do you?" "No," Irene said simply. "I just see you." And for the first time since the explosion, Jimmy Kingston didn't feel invisible. The days blurred into a rhythm neither of them expected. Irene became Jimmy's compass in a world gone dark. She walked him through his mansion room by room, her voice painting pictures his eyes couldn't capture. "The couch is 3 steps to your left. Leather, dark brown. There's a coffee table 2 feet in front of it. Glass top, so be careful." She placed his hand on surfaces, let him memorize textures and distances. "Your bedroom door has a chip in the wood at shoulder height. That's how you'll know it's yours." Jimmy listened, learned, leaned on her patience in ways he'd never leaned on anyone. One afternoon, as they walked the estate grounds, camera flashes exploded from beyond the gate. Paparazzi, vultures with lenses, shouting questions. "Jimmy, is it true you're bankrupt?" "How does it feel to be useless?" Jimmy stumbled on the gravel path, his cane slipping. Irene's arm wrapped around his waist instantly, steadying him before the cameras could capture his fall. She guided him behind a hedge, her body a shield between him and the invasive lenses. "Don't give them anything," she whispered fiercely. "You're not their story." Back inside, Jimmy's voice was quieter than usual. "Tell me about you, your family, where you're from." Irene busied herself folding a blanket that didn't need folding. "Nothing to tell." "Irene, I make really good scrambled eggs. Want some?" She was gone before he could press further. The lawyer arrived unannounced, his briefcase clicking open like a weapon. Richard Costello had served the Kingston family for 20 years, and he didn't hide his disapproval. "Jimmy, we need to discuss the situation. This girl, Irene, she's a liability. No background check, no references. If she gets hurt on your property, if she steals, she won't. You can't know that. And frankly, people are talking. Your reputation—" "My reputation?" Jimmy's laugh was bitter. "I'm blind and broke, Richard. What reputation?" "Exactly why you need to be careful. Homeless people are—" "Stop!" Jimmy's voice cut like steel. "Irene stays, and you're fired." Silence. "Excuse me?" "You heard me. Send your final invoice. Get out." Outside the study door, Irene pressed her back against the wall, hand over her mouth. Tears blurred her vision, not from sadness, but from something she'd never felt before. Someone was fighting for her. When Costello stormed past, without seeing her, Irene slipped into the study. Jimmy stood by the window he couldn't see through, jaw set. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. He turned toward her voice. "Yes, I did." And in that moment, everything changed. Weeks melted into something neither of them had words for. Jimmy ordered audiobooks and braille materials sitting beside Irene at the dining table as narrators read classics aloud. Her fingers traced raised dots while his guided hers, teaching her patterns that spelled out worlds she'd never accessed. "That's hope," he said, placing her fingertip on the page, Hope. "Hope," she repeated, the word fragile on her tongue. In return, Irene became his eyes. She described sunsets in colors he could only remember, burnt orange bleeding into deep purple, like a bruise healing backward. She stood before paintings in his collection, translating brushstrokes into stories. "This one feels lonely. The blue is so cold it almost hums." They shared meals she cooked from online tutorials. laughing when she oversalted pasta, or he knocked over a wine glass reaching for bread. The mansion, once a mausoleum of wealth, filled with something warmer than money could buy. One evening rain drummed against the windows. Jimmy's voice went quiet. Vanessa left me the day she realized I'd never see again, said I wasn't the man she agreed to marry. He swallowed hard. Maybe she was right. Irene's hand found his across the table. She was wrong. You're more than what your eyes could do. What about you? He asked gently. You never talk about before. Her breath hitched. Then, slowly, the dam broke. She told him about her mother's death, the stepfather's fists, the night she ran. Her voice cracked, describing the cold, the hunger, the men who looked at her like prey. Jimmy's jaw tightened with protective fury. But he only squeezed her hand tighter. Later, as they sat on the couch, Irene did something she'd been wanting to do for days. She lifted his hand and pressed it gently to her cheek. "This is me," she whispered, "so you can see." His fingers traced the curve of her face, the arch of her brow, the slope of her nose, the fullness of her lips. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You're beautiful," he breathed. Her hand covered his. "So are you." The space between them shrank. Jimmy's heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm falling for her." The truth hit him like a physical blow, but close behind it came the fear. How can I offer her anything? I'm blind, broken. I have nothing left. He pulled back, the moment fracturing. "It's late," he said, voice strained. "You should rest." Irene nodded, even though he couldn't see it, confusion and hurt flickering across her face. "Good night, Jimmy." As her footsteps faded, Jimmy sat alone in the darkness, loving her and terrified of what that meant. Marcus Hale stepped off a private jet at SFO with one goal: erase the evidence. The Cayman accounts were clean, the digital trail scrubbed, but loose ends remained. When his contact mentioned Jimmy Kingston was living like a recluse with some homeless girl, Marcus saw opportunity. Desperate people made mistakes, and Jimmy, blind and isolated, was desperate. But Marcus wasn't the only ghost from the past circling the estate. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday afternoon. Irene froze in the kitchen, knife hovering over vegetables. No one rang that bell. Ever. She opened the door to find him, Ray Lopez, her stepfather, looking exactly as she remembered. Bloodshot eyes, cheap cologne failing to mask the stale beer smell, and that smile that never reached his eyes. "There's my girl," he drawled. Irene's blood turned to ice. "How did you? Saw you on some blog, Billionaire's mystery woman. Real step up from the gutter." He pushed past her into the foyer, whistling low. "Nice place." "You need to leave," her voice shook. "Not without what I came for." Ray turned, arms crossed. $10,000, or I go to the press about your little shoplifting problem. The warrants I filed when you ran. Those charges are fake, and you know it. Don't matter what's true, girl. Matters what they print. Think your rich boyfriend wants a criminal under his roof? Get out." Jimmy's voice cut through the hallway. He stood 20 feet away, cane gripped like a weapon, dark glasses aimed in their direction. Ray laughed. "The blind man wants to play hero?" Jimmy moved forward, muscle memory guiding him. "This is my house. She's under my protection. Leave, now." "Or what? You gonna see me out?" Ray took a step toward Jimmy. Irene rushed between them, hands on Jimmy's chest. "Don't, please. He's not worth it." Ray's eyes glittered with cruel satisfaction. "Smart girl. You don't belong in his world, and you know it. Tick-tock, Irene. You got 3 days." He slammed the door on his way out. Irene's hands trembled against Jimmy's shirt. He reached for her face, but she pulled away. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I brought danger to your door." Irene, I should leave before he comes back, before Marcus or anyone else uses me to hurt you. Don't, Jimmy's voice cracked. Please don't run. But she was already walking away, convinced that loving him meant leaving him. For 2 days Irene moved through the mansion like a ghost, present but distant, helping Jimmy but never lingering, speaking in polite monosyllables that carved holes in his chest. On the 3rd night, Jimmy found her in the garden by sound alone, following her quiet breathing to the oak tree where they'd first met. "Why are you avoiding me?" His voice was raw. "I'm not. Don't lie. Not to me." He moved closer, cane tapping against roots. "Talk to me, Irene." The dam broke. "I'm not good for you." Her voice shattered. "I'm nobody, Jimmy. A homeless girl with a criminal stepfather and nothing to offer. I'll ruin everything you're trying to rebuild." "You deserve someone like Vanessa, someone who belongs in your world." "Stop." Jimmy's hand found her shoulder, then her face, cupping it with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "You want to know what I deserve? I deserved Marcus's betrayal. I deserved Vanessa walking away, because I was arrogant and blind long before I lost my sight." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "But you're the only person who sees me. Not my money, not my empire, not the man I used to be, just me, the broken, stumbling, terrified man sitting under this tree. And you stayed." Tears streamed down Irene's face. "Jimmy, I don't care what the world thinks. I don't care about your past or Ray or any of it." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I love you, Irene." The words hung in the night air, impossible and perfect. "I've never been loved before," she breathed, her hands covering his. "I don't know how." "Neither do I, not really. But I want to learn, with you." Irene closed the distance, pressing her lips to his. The kiss was soft, hesitant, then deepening as months of loneliness and longing poured into it. Jimmy's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and for one perfect moment the world disappeared. They walked back to the house, hand in hand. Irene describing the stars Jimmy couldn't see, both of them smiling like teenagers. Neither noticed the black SUV parked down the street. The crash came at 2 a.m., glass shattering, heavy boots on marble floors. Irene woke to rough hands yanking her from bed, a palm clamped over her mouth. "Scream, and he dies," a voice hissed. Down the hall, Jimmy bolted upright. "Irene?" Only silence answered, and then Marcus Hale's voice, cold and smooth. "Hello, old friend. Let's talk about what you're going to sign for me." Marcus's men forced Jimmy into the living room, shoving him into a chair. He caught himself on the armrest, fingers splaying over familiar leather, forcing his breathing to slow. He knew this room. He knew every angle. "Still luxurious even in the dark," Marcus drawled. "Jimmy, meet my associates. They're very persuasive." Jimmy tilted his head, tracking footsteps, weight shifts, the faint jingle of metal. 3 men, one pacing near the fireplace, one by the window, one behind him. "Where is she?" Jimmy demanded. A whimper answered from across the room. "Irene," Marcus chuckled. "Right here, and very breakable." There was a rough rustle, Irene's sharp inhale. "You're going to sign over the remaining Kingston Tech patents plus a little confession, clearing my name." "Oh, I test how many bones she can lose and still be useful." Fear clawed at Jimmy's throat, but he swallowed it. "If you hurt her, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in a cage." "You can't even find the door," Marcus sneered. Papers slapped onto the coffee table. "Pen's at your right hand. Sign." Jimmy's fingers brushed the table, felt the cool glass, the metal pen, the edge of the documents. He let his hand shake, playing weaker than he felt. "Irene," he said softly, "where are you?" "By the bookshelf," she choked out, voice trembling but clear. "Near the left wall." Good girl, he thought, giving him a map. He pictured the room, the rug, the low table, the heavy brass lamp on the sideboard, the exact distance from his chair to the edge of the fireplace. "I can't see where to sign," Jimmy said, rising slightly. "Bring it closer." "Sit down," one of the men growled, stepping forward. That was the moment. Jimmy swung his cane up hard, catching the man's wrist with a crack. The gun clattered to the rug. In the same movement, Jimmy pivoted toward the sound, driving the cane into the man's knee. He went down, screaming. "Now, Irene!" She moved like she was back on the streets, quick, low, desperate. She dove for the fallen gun, sliding across the rug. One of Marcus's men grabbed her hair. She twisted, slamming her elbow into his ribs, then bit his hand until he howled and let go. Marcus cursed, scrambling backward. "Shoot her!" "No!" Jimmy seized the heavy brass lamp from the sideboard, hurling it toward Marcus's voice. It smashed into his shoulder, sending him crashing into the glass table. Shards exploded. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. "I called them when your SUV broke the gate," another voice barked from the doorway. Jimmy's head of security, Alvarez, gun drawn. "Drop your weapons now!" Chaos erupted. Marcus's men froze under the red dot of Alvarez's laser sight. Within seconds, uniformed officers flooded the room, pinning Marcus to the ground, cuffing his associates. "You can't prove anything," Marcus spat. "Oh, we can," Alvarez said calmly. "Your emails, the offshore accounts, the lab footage you tried to erase. All forwarded to the DA." As Marcus was dragged away, an officer escorted in a handcuffed Irene Lopez, cursing and struggling. "Picked him up outside the gate," the officer told Irene. "Extortion, outstanding warrants, and a very interesting recording of him threatening you." Irene swayed, the fight draining from her. Jimmy reached for her, and she rushed into his arms, shaking. "You okay?" he whispered into her hair. She nodded against his chest, tears soaking his shirt. "You fought them. You couldn't see, and you still fought them." "I wasn't going to let them take you," he murmured. His arms tightened around her. "Not you. Never you." For the first time in a long time, Jimmy's house felt safe. Not because of the walls or the money behind them, but because they'd stood together and won. 6 months later, the mansion felt different, not like a museum for one man's ego, but like a home that breathed. Jimmy walked its halls without hesitation now, cane tapping in a confident rhythm. He knew every corner, every stair, every shift in echo. The boardroom he once dominated with glare and numbers he now led with calm certainty. Seated beside new partners who valued his mind more than his eyesight. Kingston Tech had risen from scandal with a new mission, building security systems accessible to people with disabilities. Reporters no longer called him the fallen king. They called him something better, the man who refused to stay in the dark. Irene's world had changed just as much. Her GED certificate hung framed in Jimmy's study, right beside his first magazine cover. In the mornings, she took online college classes at a small desk by the window, textbooks open, highlighters scattered, scholarship papers signed with trembling gratitude under the Kingston Foundation logo. At night, she and Jimmy cooked together, their movements practiced and easy, her reading recipes aloud, his hands moving with surprising precision. She no longer slept in the guest house. Her clothes filled his closet. Her laughter filled his rooms. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, they both thought about the beginning. The cold ground under the oak tree, Jimmy's broken sobs, Irene's shaking hand wiping away tears that weren't hers but felt like they could be. The boy who'd been born rich and lost everything. the girl who'd been born with nothing and gave away the only thing she had, her heart. That evening, the sky burned gold. Irene led Jimmy back to the oak tree, fingers laced with his. "Tell me what it looks like," he said, settling beside her. She smiled, watching the horizon. "The sun's melting into the ocean," she murmured. "Orange and pink and a little bit of red, like someone spilled paint and forgot to clean it up. The clouds look soft, like they're holding the light for just a second longer before it goes." He turned toward her voice. "Perfect." His hand slipped into his pocket, fingers closing around a small velvet box. He sank to one knee, not perfectly, a little off balance, but entirely certain. "Irene Lopez," he said, voice thick, "you became my eyes when I couldn't see. Now be my heart forever." Her hands flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely. "Jimmy, marry me." She laughed through the sobs, dropping to her knees to wrap her arms around him. "Yes," she whispered against his neck. "Yes, 1,000 times. Yes." As the last light dipped below the horizon, they sat tangled together beneath the tree where their darkness had met, and their story had begun. They had both been broken, both invisible, but together they became everything.